So basically, what we're witnessing in San Francisco in this year, 2015, is a incumbent mayor who's actually literally trying to kill the election, right?
So last Thursday night, we had the opportunity as the people-powered candidates versus Ed Lee through the League of Women Voters. It was one of two debates, forums that was scheduled. And we did such an excellent job of holding Ed Lee accountable for his policy decisions and promoting people-powered, grassroots, creative solutions, strategic solutions for the future of San Francisco, that he was pretty dumbstruck by the whole thing, and he wasn't able to hold his own amongst us as candidates. He also had bussed in or organized about 75 elderly monolingual Chinese residents to come in, and instead of providing translation services for them, he trained them to clap at a lead clapper, so they didn't know what he was saying. They didn't know what any of the candidates were saying. And we felt that that should really be front page news of the Chronicle, that instead of engaging the residents of his city to vote with him, he actually used them as political pawns. And that's very disrespectful. And
You know what? A mayor, a servant of the people, is supposed to create a space where we all negotiate our self-interest. Come on, we all have self-interest. We don't have to hide that and act. No, we all have self-interest. And the role of civil servants, particularly supervisors, and very particularly the mayor, is to create that space, that table where we come, everyone has the self-interest, and you make space for the most vulnerable. What they've done is like, all right, boys, come on in, investors. Here's the refrigerator, ransack the kitchen, the living room. Who cares about the restroom? Just take over the garden and rip everything apart. And that's basically what Ed Lee and the last three mayoral servants have done.
you can't stop the people. We know we have power because Ed Lee and his strategists are afraid of us. And so now it's just a matter of these next 3 weeks, just building the momentum and being excited about being able to win this election.
More of this attitude of we're the big dogs and we know what we're doing. Well, no, you don't know what you're doing. You're creating a situation of literal slavery, and yeah, and from the grassroots, from the communities, we're saying we've got solutions. And so the question continues to be, San Francisco, what kind of city do you want?
Well, Gandhi said that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. Well, we're actually going to jump a few steps, because it's going to be first they ignore you, and then we win. And it's a disgrace to democracy, and it's a disgrace to the profession of journalism, what's happened in San Francisco, that you have viable candidates that are offering solutions. We're of the people, and we're being ignored because we don't have a war chest. But I like to say that we don't need a war chest when we have a seed library, and that's what we have. We're planting seeds and we're building from the grassroots.
The press could very easily have said, okay, June 9th, there's 6 candidates, 1 millionaire, and 5 who would literally put their money, they've raised money from the neighborhoods, and they're able to come on board. Let's interview each of them, an hour, half hour. Let's give each candidate a voice, a space. And that's the role of the press. That's what it's been a disgrace to see that San Francisco is behaving more like the Andy Griffith Show than a world-class city, which it is, you know.
I started a nonprofit organization 4 years ago called Neighbors Developing Divisadero, because I felt that there was so much displacement going on that didn't care about the people who were already there. And I wanted to not just stand on the sidelines anymore. I wanted to figure out, how do we learn the zoning code and the planning code and get involved in investment and strategy so that we get to plan our neighborhoods in service to who is here and grow them in a way that's sustainable. And so what we also have to really look at is what got us into these crises in the first place, which is the global financial collapse. which was investment bankers, venture capitalists, investing in things that were risky, and they thought that they would get a big jackpot style return on investment, but it put our whole economy and the global economy at risk. And so we didn't have an unemployment crisis in San Francisco before the global financial collapse, and we didn't have a displacement crisis until after Ed Lee started to take over and cater to the venture capitalists and cater to the investors and developers and real estate associations rather than guide a new era, because that was our moment. If John Avalos had become mayor in 2011, like so many of us worked hard to try to achieve, we would have a different situation. We wouldn't have seen the displacement. We would have invested in green jobs through Clean Power SF. We wouldn't have held it back. So it's the decisions of the mayor that have actually gotten us into this crisis, because he didn't have the strategic analysis that was necessary. And now we have the opportunity to use our skill set as people, and I know that I can do this.
I am fired up with how the city is somersaulting for developers. Just like for our city, a $9 billion corporation who plans to build the 5M project that is 470 feet tall, taller than the Intercontinental Building.
The city has a lot of problems, for example, the problem with the homeless, the problem with the housing, the problem with the health, because the public health is not working. And basically, the mayor has been running away of the confronting the situation and looking for solutions. I was reading 3 weeks ago in the New York Times where he says that, that the homeless needs to go the way of the city. What is the irresponsibility, or how we can push pressure to the mayor to respond for that situation, because what he is avoiding the social responsibility, which is with the modernity of the state of the government, is to put in priority in the housing, in the health, in the education, and how will you be organizing and inviting to a new alternative to basically dismantle this establishment which is not working right now?
Right. Well, first of all, we become mayor on November 3rd, and it goes down in history as one of the most important dates of San Francisco. And we get excited about our future for once, rather than being filled with despair at the thought of 4 more years of this administration. And like Francisco points out, it's not just the Ed Lee administration, it's a continuation of the Newsom administration, it's the continuation of the Willie Brown administration. And so I'm someone who actually is a researcher, educator, strategic planner, program developer. I started a nonprofit. There's so much wealth of information that we can find not just in our community but in the global community, because now we do have the internet and we have the ability to find out what are people doing in other places that are successful. But I have an exciting idea about how San Francisco could become a leader and how we treat our homeless neighbors with dignity and beauty, really. We could be using city land that's underutilized right now and actually blighted and causing problems for neighborhoods, and we could work with having what I call transitional eco-villages on this land, and small amounts of people living there, and a lot of times they're already living there in tents, but we do it in a creative, humane way, filled with dignity. And we are the epicenter also of Burning Man, and that kind of creativity of, we could have beautiful lights in these areas, we could be growing food, we could figure out what in the community could be supported. Maybe they need a food truck, or maybe there's a group that could be doing some work to beautify the neighborhood in some fashion or another, or growing food. But we can figure out ways for people to be of service rather than looking at them as problems.
There's a real lack of that, what you mentioned, social responsibility. There's a real lack of that. And these folks have spent hours and hours and hours on studying what people in the United States are afraid of. I'm talking about the advisors to Ed Lee. I'm talking about leadership in both Democratic and Republican parties. And they choose to move on people's fears, right?
Yeah.
And so as the economy becomes global and as so many shifts happen, they conduct studies that say now, for example, they're saying, well, pretty much the people of the United States now believe in oligarchy. They don't really have faith in democracy. And they move in that direction. And so that's why you get a guy like Donald Trump playing on the fears of people. But I say to Donald Trump and to the Mayor Lee administration, don't bite the hand that feeds you, because we're the ones that feed this economy. So I think social responsibility requires us to support small businesses. We actually looked at what commercial rent control would look like and discovered that we'd actually have to plan it way in advance, because we'd have to start a statewide campaign
Right.
to change that commercial rent control. But we can create benefits for small and medium-sized businesses on just something as simple as having a quarter of the year, quarterly studies, workshops for businesses on the changing of tax law and training small business on actually changing tax law, because tax law is changed by big businesses.
Really upset that the debate kind of got canceled. I don't know what you've talked about.
Yeah.
I'm Reed Martin, also running for mayor. We're kind of looking forward to this evening and actually getting a chance to kind of talk about issues. This is, I was saying, the first time that I'm aware of that there have been this few debates. I kind of look back the last 40 years, and every year has had at least 2 or 3 debates. So we've got one kind of opportunity, and it's been sort of crazy. But I think it feels like an intentional decision to try to prevent us from actually talking about the types of issues that we need to be talking about as a city, the sort of people-powered movements that we're trying to gain strength and momentum for in San Francisco, so that we can actually move things forward in the right types of directions. We've been hanging out and seeing the work of the last 5 years, 4.5 years, I guess, of the current administration, and it's just not been moving in the direction we want to see. And as I've said before, I don't want to be standing here talking about all these problems, because this is complete failure of leadership. And we have so much opportunity. I want to be talking about all the opportunities and the visions and the directions, the cool stuff we can be working together to create, and all the art and all the projects happening in the city on Market Street, from Better Market Street projects to all sorts of collaborative ideas for new business ventures and so on. There's so much cool stuff that we can be talking about, and instead we're sitting here watching people disappearing from our city. We're watching communities torn apart. We're watching small businesses going out of business. And it's not right. It's not the right way to go. And with all of the money that we have so much opportunity to build something a lot bigger. So really excited to see it.
So do you really consider that the challenge is right now to create a really good coalition of organizations in order to create a big movement to really take position of the basically the direction of the city and the direction of the communities in solving the problems, the social problems, the displacement and the housing? Basically, that's what you consider the most important right now.
Yeah, I think we have a great group of people running for mayor, but I think we need a coalition of people not just in this space, but we need coalitions across the city to bond together, especially on the progressive side, to help push these movements forward in a much bigger way than just this election. I think this election is actually a lot more critical than certainly than media coverage would have given it in terms of what's happening. I think we have the D3 election, which is a really interesting one in terms of progressive politics and what's happening in the city as well. But I think overall in the city, we have so many people and so many groups and so many organizations who are working on the right types of things. I think the best way that we can do is to get all of those wonderful people working together to build coalitions against this sort of corrupt political machine that we're up against.
My name is Francisco Herrera, your candidate for mayor of San Francisco for housing, education, and health. 3 of us candidates formed a coalition, 1-2-3, to replace millionaire candidate Ed Lee. We did this in order to create a city that responds to the needs of all San Franciscans. Mayor Ed Lee canceled our second public forum in order to bury the election. On November 3rd, we are asking you to vote 1-2-3 to replace Ed Lee. Thank you very much.